The massive space station turned slowly in the darkness, its metal surface catching the light from 3 different stars. The Galactic Defense Academy was bigger than most cities, floating in empty space near the neutral world of Centauri Prime. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its ports every day, bringing new students and supplies. Commander Veltar walked through the long corridors of the academy. His forearms moved in perfect rhythm as he carried his teaching materials. His silver scales caught the bright lights overhead, and his large eyes studied the lesson plan on his datapad. Today would be different from his usual classes about space battles and fleet tactics. Today he would teach about something much older and more basic. The classroom was on level 47, with large windows that looked out into space. Veltar had been teaching at the academy for 20 years. He had trained some of the best military minds in the galaxy. Students from every major civilization had sat in his classes and learned about war, strategy, and defense. As he entered the room, Veltar saw his students already taking their seats. This was his advanced tactical analysis class, made up of the Academy's best cadets. Each one represented their home world and their species. Each one had scored in the top 5% of all military academy tests across the galaxy. Jimin sat in the back corner, as he always did. The young human was quiet and kept to himself most of the time. His black hair was cut short in military style, and his dark eyes were always watching and learning. He was one of only 3 humans in the Academy's long history. Most other species found humans strange and unpredictable. Jimin had learned early to stay quiet and prove himself through his work. Near the front of the room, Hyok adjusted his crystalline headpiece. The Zenthari student's skin had a blue-white glow that came from his species' natural telepathic abilities. His people could read thoughts and emotions from other beings. This made them excellent at understanding enemy plans, but it also meant they felt everything more deeply than other species. Nari stretched her arms above her head, showing the quick, smooth movements of her Felinian heritage. Her people looked like the cats from Earth, but they walked on 2 legs and had developed advanced technology. Her large green eyes could see in almost total darkness, and her hearing could pick up sounds that other species could not detect. She was the best scout in their class. Quan sat perfectly straight in his chair, reviewing notes from their last lesson. The Drak-Nari student's reptilian features were calm and focused. His people had evolved from creatures similar to Earth's lizards, but much larger and smarter. They were known across the galaxy for their logical thinking and brilliant military strategies. Quan had never lost a war game simulation. At the table closest to the window, Rena hummed softly to herself. The Etherian student's pale skin seemed to glow with its own light. Her people had evolved beyond physical conflict thousands of years ago. They settled disputes through discussion and mental connection. Rena was at the academy to learn how to protect peaceful worlds from aggressive species. Veltar looked at his mixed group of students and felt proud. In his early years of teaching, classes were usually made up of students from just 1 or 2 species. Now, the academy brought together the best minds from across the galaxy. They learned from each other as much as they learned from their teachers. "Good morning, cadets," Veltar said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Today we will study something different from our usual lessons about space warfare and fleet movements." The students looked up with interest. Veltar was known for his creative teaching methods. He often used historical examples to help students understand complex military principles. "We will examine what we call archaeological warfare data, Veltar," continued. This means studying how different species fought wars before they developed space travel and joined galactic civilization. HFY raised one of his long, thin hands. Commander, why do we need to study primitive warfare? Surely these old methods have nothing to teach us about modern military strategy. Veltar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. That is exactly what most military leaders think, Cadet HFY. But understanding how a species approaches conflict tells us much about how they think and act. When we meet new civilizations, we need to understand their military mindset. He activated the large holographic display at the front of the room. The lights dimmed automatically, and a three-dimensional star map appeared in the air. Red dots marked the locations of recently contacted worlds. The galaxy is always growing, Veltar explained. Our scout ships find new civilizations every year. Some are peaceful, some are aggressive, some are completely alien in their thinking. Before we make contact, we study their history and culture. Nari's ears perked up with curiosity. Do we spy on them before making contact? We observe, Veltar corrected. We watch their communications, study their history, and analyze their behavior patterns. This helps us understand how to approach them safely. The star map changed to show images from different worlds. The students saw cities, vehicles, and various alien species going about their daily lives. Most species follow similar patterns, Veltar continued. They develop tools, then weapons, then space travel. They fight small wars, then larger wars. Then they usually develop beyond the need for warfare altogether. Quan nodded approvingly. Logical progression. Conflict drives innovation, but eventually, intelligence leads to peace. Exactly. Veltar agreed. Today we will look at warfare data from several species who recently joined galactic civilization. You will analyze their military development and write reports on what their combat history tells us about their character. Rena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her people had such sensitive empathic abilities that even viewing violent imagery caused them distress. Commander, will this content be intense? Veltar's expression softened. He knew that some species had difficulty with violent material. The footage shows historical conflicts, Cadet Rena. Nothing more disturbing than what you might see in a standard military history textbook. If you feel overwhelmed, you may step outside. The Etherian student nodded gratefully but remained in her seat. She was training to be a peace negotiator, which meant she needed to understand conflict even if it made her uncomfortable. Jimin watched the exchange with quiet interest. He knew what was coming, though he could not say anything about it. Academy. Rules were very strict about cadets sharing advanced knowledge of lessons, but he also knew that his classmates were completely unprepared for what they were about to see. Veltar began loading the first set of data files. We will start with the Zalani Confederation. They achieved spaceflight about 50 years ago and have been peaceful members of galactic society ever since. The holographic display showed tall, thin aliens with purple skin fighting with weapons that looked like glowing spears. The combat was formal and ritualistic, with clear rules about when fighting could start and stop. Notice how their warfare follows strict patterns, Veltar pointed out. Limited objectives, minimal casualties, clear victory conditions. This tells us the Zalani value order and tradition over pure military effectiveness. The students took notes and discussed the tactical implications. This was exactly the kind of academic exercise they expected. Next came footage from the Karathan clans, showing heavily armored warriors fighting with energy shields and plasma blades. Their battles were more intense than the Zalani conflicts. but still clearly limited in scope and duration. The Korathans have a warrior culture, Veltar explained, but even their warfare follows codes of honor. They fight to prove themselves, not to destroy their enemies completely. More species followed. Each showed different approaches to combat, but all seemed to follow the same basic pattern that Veltar had described. They fought, they innovated, they eventually moved beyond the need for warfare. Jimin remained silent, watching his classmates take comfortable notes about these primitive forms of combat. None of them seemed worried or disturbed by what they were seeing. Why would they be? The warfare they were studying was limited, rule-based, and relatively civilized. Veltar saved the final case study for last. He loaded a new set of data files and checked his notes one more time. Our last example comes from a recently contacted species in the Sol system, he announced. They call themselves humans. Their warfare data covers approximately 10,000 years of development. The commander activated the new files, expecting to see another routine example of primitive combat evolution. The first images appeared in the holographic display, showing armored warriors fighting with metal weapons on horseback. Jimin took a deep breath and prepared himself for what was about to happen. The holographic display filled with images of ancient Earth battles. Roman soldiers marched in perfect lines across digital battlefields. Their metal armor caught the classroom lights as they moved in formation. The alien cadets watched with mild interest as the humans fought with short swords and rectangular shields. Commander Veltar pointed to the tactical formations. Notice how these early humans organized themselves. Very similar to the Korathan clan structures we just studied. Disciplined ranks, clear command hierarchy, limited objectives. Quan made notes on his datapad. The Draknari student found the Roman tactics interesting but not impressive. Their weapons are quite primitive, he observed. Simple metal blades and wooden spears. Their armor offers minimal protection. The footage shifted to show medieval knights on horseback. Heavy metal. Suits covered both riders and horses. Long spears and swords glinted in the artificial light. The students watched castle sieges and battlefield charges with academic detachment. Heavy cavalry charges, Nari commented, her Felinian reflexes analyzing the movement patterns. Effective against infantry, but slow and predictable, easy to counter with proper positioning. Rena watched the combat with slight discomfort, but nothing worse than she felt during their regular military history lessons. The fighting looked brutal compared to her peaceful world, but no more so than warfare from other primitive species they had studied. The timeline advanced through human history. Mongol horsemen swept across digital steppes. Chinese armies fought, with crossbows and early gunpowder weapons. The students took careful notes about tactics and technology development. Interesting progression, Hayok said, his telepathic abilities picking up faint emotional echoes from the historical footage. They develop new weapons quickly, but their basic approach to warfare remains consistent. Veltar nodded approvingly. Exactly what we expect to see. Innovation drives military development, but cultural patterns remain stable across centuries. The images showed sailing ships firing cannons at each other. Armies marched across battlefields, with muskets and bayonets. The students watched European wars unfold with the same detached interest they had shown for other species conflicts. Jimin sat quietly in the back, knowing what was coming, but unable to warn his classmates. Academy protocol was very clear about not interfering with lessons. He watched their calm faces and comfortable note-taking, knowing it would not last much longer. The American Civil War appeared on the display. The students saw larger armies. and more powerful weapons. Artillery fired across battlefields, and soldiers fought in long lines with rifles. The scale was bigger than previous conflicts, but still within normal parameters for developing civilizations. Their weapons are improving rapidly, Quan observed, from swords to firearms in just a few centuries. Much faster technological development than most species. But still following predictable patterns, Veltar added. Larger armies, better weapons, more organized tactics. Nothing we have not seen before. The footage moved into the industrial age. Trains carried soldiers and supplies across continents. Factories produced weapons and ammunition in massive quantities. The students noted the increased scale, but remained untroubled by what they were seeing. Then came the first images from World War I. The display filled with trenches stretching across ruined landscapes. Artillery shells exploded in sequences that went on for hours. Machine guns fired continuously at waves of attacking soldiers. The cadets began to shift in their seats as the scale of destruction became apparent. These battles involve millions of soldiers, Nari said quietly, her enhanced hearing picking up the distant sounds of explosions even through the holographic playback. Entire armies fighting for months over small pieces of land. Hyok frowned as stronger emotional echoes reached his telepathic senses. The residual psychic imprints left on the historical recordings carried pain and fear that made him uncomfortable. Commander, the psychological stress levels in this footage are quite high. Veltar checked his data readings. Some increase in emotional intensity is normal as warfare becomes more mechanized. Continue observation. The World War I footage showed gas attacks and aerial combat. Soldiers lived in muddy trenches for years, fighting and dying for advances measured in meters rather than kilometers. The industrial nature of the killing became clear as the students watched artillery barrages that lasted for days. Rena pressed, her hands to her temples. Her empathic abilities were picking up the suffering embedded in the recordings. They fight with such intensity, as if the survival of their entire species depends on each battle. Many primitive species go through total war phases, Veltar explained, though his own silver scales were beginning to darken slightly with unease. Usually this leads to rapid technological development and eventual peace. The timeline advanced to the period between the world wars. The students saw armies growing larger and weapons becoming more sophisticated. Then came the first footage from World War II. Quan stopped taking notes as he watched German tank formations sweep across Europe. The speed and coordination of the attacks impressed his tactical mind, but the scale troubled him. These are not limited conflicts, he said slowly. They are attempting to conquer entire continents. The display showed the bombing of cities. Hundreds of aircraft filled the skies, dropping thousands of bombs on civilian targets. The students watched buildings collapse and fires spread across urban areas. This was different from the battlefield combat they had been studying. They target non-combatants, Nari whispered, her feline instincts reacting to the predatory nature of the attacks. This is not warfare. This is hunting. Hyok gripped the edges of his desk as stronger psychic echoes washed over him. The telepathic recordings carried emotions and thoughts from millions of humans experiencing terror, rage, and determination all at once. Commander, I am picking up unprecedented levels of psychological stress. These beings fight with emotional intensities that exceed our measurement scales. Veltar paused the footage to check his readings again. The data confirmed what Hyok was sensing. Human emotional responses during combat showed patterns unlike anything in galactic records. Perhaps we should take a short break, he suggested. No, Rena said quietly, though tears were forming in her large eyes. If we are to understand this species, we must see what they are capable of. The footage continued. The students watched the Holocaust documentation, naval battles in the Pacific, and the systematic destruction of entire cities. The industrial approach to warfare became impossible to ignore. Humans had turned killing into a science, with factories dedicated to producing death on a massive scale. They fight like machines, Quan said, his voice barely above a whisper. But machines with emotions, calculating efficiency combined with passionate hatred. The display showed resistance fighters and partisan warfare, humans fighting in occupied territories with improvised weapons and suicidal determination. The students saw ordinary people transformed into deadly combatants, using whatever tools they could find to kill their enemies. Every human becomes a potential soldier, Nari observed, her hunting instincts recognizing something terrifying in the footage. Their entire population converts to warfare when threatened. Jimin watched his classmates' growing discomfort with a mixture of sympathy and pride. He understood their shock at seeing humanity's capacity for organized violence, but he also knew they were only seeing the beginning. The World War II footage reached its climax with the island-hopping campaigns. In the Pacific, the students watched humans fight to the death for small pieces of rock in the middle of vast oceans. The determination and sacrifice shown in the battles went beyond anything they had studied from other species. They do not surrender, HFY said, his telepathic abilities overwhelmed by the intensity of human emotions in the recordings. Even when facing certain death, they continue fighting. Veltar realized that this lesson was not going according to plan. The human warfare data was unlike anything he had encountered in 20 years of teaching military history. The intensity and scale were beyond normal parameters for primitive civilizations, but the timeline was only halfway through human military development. The display showed that there were still thousands of years of warfare evolution left to examine. Perhaps we should continue this lesson tomorrow, Veltar suggested, noting the stress levels of his students. What comes next? Rena asked, though her voice trembled as she spoke. Veltar checked his data files. The next section was labeled Nuclear Warfare. He had no idea what that meant, but the energy readings associated with the weapons were unlike anything in galactic records. I believe, he said slowly, that we have only begun to understand this species. Commander Veltar looked at his disturbed students and made a decision. We will continue, he announced. Understanding this species may be crucial for galactic security. The holographic display shifted to show the post-war period. New weapons appeared that made the previous conflicts look small. Jet aircraft screamed across digital skies. Rockets carried warheads across continents. The students watched armies equipped with automatic weapons and armored vehicles. Their technology advances incredibly fast, Quan observed, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. They go from simple firearms to guided missiles in just decades. The Korean War footage began playing. The alien cadets saw human soldiers fighting in frozen mountains with weapons that could destroy entire buildings. Artillery strikes flattened hillsides. Airstrikes turned forests into burning wastelands. HFY pressed his crystalline hands against his temples. The telepathic echoes from the battlefield recordings were becoming painful. The emotional intensity is increasing. These humans fight with a psychological commitment that exceeds anything in our databases. Notice their tactical evolution, Veltar said, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite his growing unease. They adapt their strategies constantly. Every conflict teaches them new ways to kill more efficiently. The Vietnam War appeared on the display. The students watched jungle warfare that lasted for years. Helicopters dropped soldiers into enemy territory. Chemical weapons stripped leaves from entire forests. Bombs fell like rain on supply routes that stretched across multiple countries. Nari's feline senses were overwhelmed by the violence. Her enhanced hearing picked up sounds from the recordings that her classmates could not detect. Screams, explosions, and the constant rattle of automatic weapons created a symphony of destruction that made her want to run. "They fight everywhere," she whispered. "In jungles, cities, mountains, deserts. No environment stops them." The footage showed the development of special forces. Small groups of humans trained to operate behind enemy lines with surgical precision. The students watched these elite soldiers complete missions that would challenge entire alien military units. "Individual human soldiers display capabilities that match our enhanced species," Rena said with growing alarm. "But they achieve this through training and determination rather than natural evolution." Veltar paused the display to review the data readings. The psychological profiles emerging from the human warfare analysis were unlike anything in galactic records. Other species fought for territory, resources, or survival. Humans seemed to fight for abstract concepts that alien minds struggled to understand. "They fight for ideas," he said slowly. "Democracy, freedom, ideology. These are not tangible things you can hold or measure, yet humans die for them willingly." The timeline advanced to show proxy wars during the Cold War period. The students watched human armies fighting each other using weapons provided by their rival superpowers. Conflicts raged across multiple continents simultaneously, each one a testing ground for new military technologies. Quan studied the strategic implications with his analytical Draknari mind. "They use warfare as research," he said, with growing horror. "Each conflict teaches them how to improve their killing methods." The display showed the evolution of military technology through these proxy conflicts. Guided missiles became more accurate. Aircraft became faster and more deadly. Tanks and artillery grew more powerful with each generation. "The rate of innovation is unprecedented," Hayek said, his telepathic abilities picking up the cold calculations behind human military development. "They apply scientific methods to the study of destruction." Modern warfare footage began. The students watched the Gulf War with its precision bombing and electronic warfare. Missiles struck targets from hundreds of miles away. Satellite guidance systems allowed humans to destroy specific buildings while leaving neighboring structures untouched. "Surgical precision," Nari observed, her predatory instincts recognizing the hunting efficiency. They can kill exactly who they want, when they want, from any distance. The footage showed night vision equipment that allowed humans to fight in complete darkness. Thermal imaging revealed hidden enemies. Communication systems coordinated attacks across vast distances in real time. "They have eliminated the natural limitations of warfare," Rena said with growing distress. "Darkness, distance, weather, nothing stops them from fighting." Veltar realized they had reached a critical point in the lesson. The human warfare data was revealing capabilities that exceeded most galactic civilizations' military technologies. "Perhaps we should analyze what we have learned so far," he suggested. "No." Jimin spoke for the first time during the lesson. His quiet voice carried across the silent classroom. "You need to see it all." The other students turned to look at the human cadet. His calm expression contrasted sharply with their growing distress. Hyok's telepathic abilities detected no fear or shame in Jimin's thoughts, only a deep sadness and grim acceptance. "You know what comes next," Nari said, her enhanced senses reading Jimin's body language. "This gets worse." Jimin nodded slowly. "Much worse." The timeline advanced to show conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Urban warfare footage filled the display. The students watched human soldiers fighting room by room through destroyed cities. Improvised explosive devices created random death throughout populated areas. "They fight among civilians," Quan said with disbelief. "The entire population becomes part of the battlefield." The footage showed humans adapting to insurgency warfare. Drones flew overhead, providing constant surveillance. Soldiers wore advanced armor and carried weapons that could see through walls. Every piece of equipment was designed to give humans an advantage in the deadly game of urban combat. Hyok suddenly doubled over as a wave of psychic energy hit him. The telepathic recordings carried emotional signatures that his sensitive mind was not equipped to handle. "They enjoy it," he gasped. "Some of them actually enjoy the fighting." The other students stared at him in shock. The concept of finding pleasure in combat was alien to most galactic civilizations. Even warrior species like the Draknari fought for honor or necessity, not for the thrill of violence. "That cannot be correct," Veltar said, checking his readings. "No sapient species finds combat enjoyable." "The data does not lie," Hyok said through gritted teeth. "I can feel their emotions through the recordings. Fear, anger, determination, but also excitement and satisfaction. They have learned to love what they are good at." The display showed special operations forces conducting night raids. The students watched humans moving through darkness with perfect coordination. Each soldier was equipped with technology that would be considered advanced by galactic standards, yet they treated it as routine equipment. "Individual humans operate at the level of our elite military units," Nari observed, "but they train thousands of them." The footage revealed the scope of human military organization. Bases spread across multiple continents, supply chains that could deliver equipment anywhere on their planet within hours, communication networks that connected every soldier to a global command structure. "This is not primitive warfare," Quan said quietly. "This is a military machine that spans their entire world." Rena was crying now, her empathic abilities overwhelmed by the suffering she sensed in the recordings. "How do they live with themselves? How do they sleep knowing they are capable of such destruction?" Jimin's voice was soft but clear. "We tell ourselves it is necessary. That we fight so others do not have to. That our violence protects peace." The room fell silent as his words sank in. The alien cadets were beginning to understand that human warfare was not just about technology or tactics. It was about a fundamental difference in how humans viewed conflict and their role in it. Veltar looked at his timeline display. They had covered thousands of years of human military development, but the readings showed they were still not finished. The energy signatures for the next section showed weapons with power levels that exceeded his measurement scales. "What comes next?" he asked Jimin directly. The human student looked up with eyes that carried the weight of his species' history. "Nuclear weapons," he said simply. "The power to end all life on our planet." The classroom temperature seemed to drop as the implications hit the alien students. They had just watched humans perfect the art of conventional warfare, and now they were about to see weapons that could destroy entire worlds. The holographic display changed to show a single aircraft flying over a city. The date marker read August 6, 1945. The alien cadets watched as the plane dropped what looked like a simple bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Then the world exploded. A flash of light brighter than their classroom's artificial sun filled the display. The explosion grew into a massive fireball that consumed everything in its path. Buildings, people, and vehicles simply vanished in the intense heat. The fireball rose into the sky, forming a mushroom-shaped cloud that towered above the ruined city. The classroom fell into absolute silence. The alien cadets stared at the display with expressions of complete shock. The energy readings showed power levels that their instruments could barely measure. "What was that?" Nari whispered, her voice barely audible. Veltar checked his data 3 times before speaking. According to these readings, that single weapon released energy equivalent to 20,000 tons of conventional explosives. Quan's analytical mind struggled to process the information. One bomb destroyed an entire city. That level of destruction would require our largest fleet weapons. The display showed the aftermath. Miles of flattened buildings. Thousands of human casualties. Radiation effects that would last for decades. The students watched rescue workers moving through the devastation, trying to help survivors of unimaginable destruction. "They used this weapon on their own species," Rena said through her tears. "Their own kind." 3 days later, the footage showed a second nuclear explosion over Nagasaki. Another city vanished in atomic fire. Another mushroom cloud rose into the sky. The message was clear. The first bomb was not an accident or a one-time event. Hyok was shaking now, his telepathic abilities overwhelmed by the psychic echoes of hundreds of thousands of human deaths. The emotional trauma embedded in these recordings is beyond measurement, so much suffering concentrated in single moments. But the timeline was just beginning the nuclear age. The display showed weapons tests in the years following the war. Each explosion was larger than the last. The students watched hydrogen bombs that made the Hiroshima weapon look small in comparison. "This one is 1,000 times more powerful than the first," Veltar read from his data. His 4 hands trembled as he checked the numbers again. A single weapon capable of destroying entire regions. The Cold War footage revealed the true horror of human nuclear development. Thousands of nuclear weapons built by both the United States and Soviet Union. Missiles that could carry multiple warheads across continents. Submarines lurking beneath the oceans with enough firepower to end civilization. They built enough weapons to destroy their planet dozens of times over, Quan said in disbelief. "The mathematical analysis makes no sense. Why build more weapons than you need for total destruction?" Jimin's voice was quiet but steady. "Because we wanted to make sure. The other side knew we could destroy them completely, no matter what they did first." The footage showed missile silos hidden across the American and Russian countryside. Each one contained weapons that could travel halfway around the world in 30 minutes. The students watched humans calmly maintaining these instruments of global destruction as if they were normal military equipment. "They live with this every day," Nari observed, her enhanced senses picking up the tension in the recorded humans' movements, knowing that civilization could end at any moment. The Cuban Missile Crisis footage appeared next. The alien cadets watched human leaders bring their species to the edge of nuclear war over political principles. For 13 days, the fate of all human life hung in the balance while politicians and generals made decisions that could have ended everything. "They almost destroyed themselves over ideology," Rena sobbed. "Abstract concepts nearly led to the extinction of their entire species." Hayek was clutching his head now, his telepathic abilities picking up the fear and tension from millions of humans during the crisis. The psychological stress levels during this period exceed anything in galactic records. An entire species living in terror of self-annihilation. The display showed children practicing duck and cover drills in schools, families building fallout shelters in their basements, public service announcements explaining how to survive nuclear attacks. An entire generation of humans grew up knowing their world could end without warning. How do they function? Veltar asked in amazement. How does a species develop normally when every individual knows they could die in nuclear fire at any moment? We adapt, Jimin answered simply. Humans are very good at adapting to impossible situations. The footage continued through decades of nuclear standoff. More countries developed atomic weapons. The students watched nuclear tests in deserts and oceans, each one demonstrating humanity's growing ability to destroy itself. France, Britain, China, India, Pakistan. Each new nuclear power added to the global arsenal. Multiple factions with world-ending weapons, Quan calculated with horror. The probability of accidental warfare approaches mathematical certainty over time. The display showed close calls and accidents. Computer malfunctions that nearly triggered nuclear war. Human errors that brought the species within minutes of extinction. Each incident revealed how close humanity had come to destroying itself through mistake or misunderstanding. They have been on the edge of self-extinction for decades, Nari said, her predatory instincts recognizing the constant danger, living as prey to their own weapons. Modern nuclear footage appeared, showing current arsenals maintained by multiple nations, thousands of warheads ready for launch at a moment's notice, missile defense systems designed to shoot down incoming weapons. The students watched humans preparing for nuclear warfare as if it were an inevitable part of their future. The weapons keep getting more sophisticated, Veltar observed, reading the technical specifications. More accurate, more powerful, more difficult to defend against. The display showed nuclear submarines patrolling the oceans with enough firepower to destroy continents. Strategic bombers carrying weapons that could level entire countries. Mobile missile launchers hidden in forests and mountains, ready to emerge and fire at predetermined targets. A global network of death, Hyuk whispered, his telepathic abilities detecting the cold professionalism of the humans who operated these systems. They have turned planetary destruction into a career specialty. The footage revealed the human military personnel who worked with nuclear weapons. The students watched them going through their daily routines, maintaining missiles, running system checks, practicing launch procedures. These humans treated potential global extinction as routine military duty. They sleep peacefully knowing they possess the power to crack planets, Rena said in amazement. Not just the leaders, but ordinary soldiers who could end civilization. With the turn of a key, Quan was staring at the tactical implications with growing horror. Any human military unit with nuclear weapons has the destructive power of our largest battle fleets. Individual humans command forces that could defeat galactic civilizations. The display showed current nuclear doctrine and strategy. Mutually assured destruction, the principle that nuclear war would destroy everyone involved, making it theoretically impossible to win. The students watched human strategists calmly discussing scenarios for global annihilation. They have made extinction into a logical choice, Veltar said, his silver scales now completely dark with stress. They threaten to destroy everything rather than accept defeat. The timeline reached the present day, showing ongoing nuclear Tensions between modern human nations. New weapons being developed. Old weapons being modernized. The constant threat of nuclear warfare woven into the fabric of human civilization. HFY suddenly stood up from his desk, his crystalline features reflecting the horrifying light from the nuclear explosions still playing on the display. "I cannot continue," he announced, his voice shaking. "I resign from the academy." The telepathic student's declaration broke the spell that had held the classroom in stunned silence. Other cadets began to stir, their faces showing the psychological impact of what they had witnessed. "The human mind is fundamentally different from ours," HFY continued, his telepathic abilities having touched the thoughts and emotions embedded in the nuclear warfare recordings. "They do not just possess these weapons. They think using them is acceptable. They plan for scenarios where destroying their own world becomes necessary." Veltar tried to restore order, but he could see that several other students were preparing to follow HFY's example. The human warfare footage had revealed something that challenged everything the galactic community believed about civilization and military development. The breaking point had been reached. HFY's resignation announcement hung in the air like a death sentence. The Zenthari student stood beside his desk, his crystalline features reflecting the nuclear fire still glowing on the holographic display. His telepathic abilities had touched something in the human recordings that broke his mind's ability to process what he had witnessed. "I have seen into their thoughts through the psychic echoes," HFY said, his voice trembling with terror. "They do not just build these weapons because they must. They sleep peacefully at night knowing they can destroy worlds. They eat meals with their families while planning scenarios for global extinction. This is not warfare. This is madness given form." Commander Veltar tried to maintain order in his classroom. "Cadet HFY, please remain calm. We are studying historical data, not current threats." "Current threats?" HFY laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Commander, according to your own timeline, humans maintain thousands of these weapons right now. They have submarines in our oceans carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire systems. This is not history. This is their present reality." Nari was the next to stand. The Felinian student's enhanced senses had picked up details in the footage that her classmates had missed. "I resign as well," she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people are apex predators. We understand hunting and killing for survival, but humans hunt their own species with weapons that can crack planets. They stalk each other with extinction-level force. We are prey compared to them." Her words sent a chill through the remaining students. If a species known for their predatory abilities considered humans too dangerous, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? Quan remained seated, but his analytical mind was working through the tactical implications of everything they had seen. "The mathematical probabilities are impossible," he said slowly. "No rational species maintains enough weapons to destroy their homeworld multiple times. The resource allocation makes no strategic sense unless—" He stopped speaking as the full realization hit him. His Draknari heritage prized logical thinking above all else, and the logic of human nuclear strategy was terrifying in its clarity. "Unless what?" Veltar asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. "Unless they consider total destruction an acceptable outcome," Quan finished. "They have built these arsenals not to win wars, but to ensure that losing means everyone dies. They would rather end all life than accept defeat." The Draknari student stood up and began packing his belongings. "I also resign from the academy. There is no defense against an enemy that prefers mutual extinction to surrender. Our military training is useless against a species that fights as if existence itself is negotiable. Rena was sobbing now, her empathic abilities overwhelmed by the residual suffering contained in the human warfare recordings. "How do their children sleep at night?" she asked through her tears. "How do they form families and build homes knowing that everything could vanish in nuclear fire at any moment?" She looked at Jimin with a mixture of pity and terror. "How do you live with the knowledge that your own species has chosen to balance on the edge of extinction for decades?" Jimin met her gaze steadily. "We tell ourselves it keeps the peace, that the fear of total destruction prevents anyone from starting wars. We call it deterrence." "Deterrence," Nari snarled, her predatory instincts fully activated. "You have made your entire species into a weapon pointed at itself. Every human alive lives under threat of instant death because your leaders decided that mutual annihilation was better than losing conflicts." More students began to stand. The footage had revealed something that went beyond military capability. They had witnessed a fundamental difference in how humans viewed existence itself. Other species developed weapons to defend their way of life. Humans had developed weapons that could end all life, then decided to live with them permanently. Veltar watched his classroom empty as student after student announced their resignation from the academy. In 20 years of teaching, he had never seen anything like this. Military cadets were trained to face danger and death, but the human warfare data had revealed something that broke their psychological defenses. The timeline shows this continuing. "To the present day," observed one of the remaining students, "a Karathi engineer whose people specialized in defensive technologies. They have lived with these weapons for almost 80 years. Multiple generations born into a world that could end without warning. And they function normally," added another student, her voice filled with disbelief. "They raise children, build cities, create art, explore space, all while maintaining arsenals that could destroy everything they have built." Jimin stood up slowly, knowing that his words would either help his classmates understand humanity or drive away the few who remained. "We function because we have to," he said quietly. "Because the alternative is giving up. Humans do not give up." "Even when giving up would be rational?" asked Quan, who had not yet left despite his resignation. "Especially then," Jimin replied. "We learned long ago that rational thinking has limits. Sometimes you have to be willing to do impossible things to protect what matters." Hyuk, who was gathering his belongings, stopped and stared at the human student. "You just proved my point. You admit that your species operates beyond rational thought when threatened. That makes you unpredictable and therefore infinitely dangerous." The telepathic student's crystalline features reflected the dying light from the nuclear explosions on the display. "I can sense your thoughts, Jimin. You are not afraid of those weapons. You are proud of them. Proud that your species created instruments of universal destruction and then had the courage to live with them." "Of course I am proud," Jimin said, simply. "We faced a choice between peace through strength or peace through submission. We chose strength, even though it meant living with the possibility of extinction." The remaining students exchanged horrified glances. They were beginning to understand that the human approach to warfare was not just about technology or tactics. It was about a fundamental willingness to embrace destruction rather than accept defeat. Rena stood up, her empathic abilities no longer able to handle the emotional resonance from the recordings. "I resign," she announced. "My people evolved beyond violence 50,000 years ago. We achieved peace through understanding and compassion. But humans achieved peace by making war too terrible to survive. She looked at the holographic display, which still showed images of nuclear weapons ready for launch. You did not evolve beyond warfare. You evolved warfare beyond survival itself. More resignations followed. Students who had trained for years to defend their civilizations realized they were psychologically unprepared for an enemy that had weaponized extinction. The classroom that had begun the day with eager military minds was now half empty, filled only with terrified aliens trying to process what they had learned. Commander Veltar finally shut down the holographic display, but the images remained, burned into everyone's memory. Mushroom clouds rising over cities, submarines patrolling with world-ending weapons, human soldiers calmly maintaining instruments of global destruction. "Class dismissed," he announced, his voice hollow with shock. The remaining students filed out. Veltar looked at his lesson plan for the next day. The human warfare timeline still had decades of development left to cover. Modern precision weapons, cyber warfare, space-based military systems. Each advancement building on the foundation of nuclear deterrence that had already broken half his class. Jimin remained in his seat as the classroom emptied. He watched his former classmates leave, knowing that word of this lesson would spread throughout the academy within hours. Soon, every alien cadet would know that humans were not just another species seeking membership in galactic civilization. They were something unprecedented, a species that had turned the threat of extinction into a tool of statecraft, and somehow learned to live with that choice. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's application for membership came with implications no one had anticipated. The question was no longer whether humans belonged in galactic civilization, but whether galactic civilization was ready for humans. The corridors of the Galactic Defense Academy buzzed with whispered conversations and fearful glances. Word of Commander Veltar's human warfare lesson had spread through the station like wildfire. Cadets who had not attended the class sought out those who had, desperate to understand what could have caused mass resignations from the Academy's most prestigious tactical analysis program. Hyuk walked through the main corridor, his crystalline features dim with emotional exhaustion. Other students avoided him, sensing the psychic distress that radiated from his telepathic abilities. The Zenthari cadet had not slept since viewing the human warfare footage. Every time he closed his eyes, he experienced the echoes of nuclear, fire, and the thoughts of humans who had learned to live with extinction as a daily reality. "Is it true?" asked Mireille, a young Altarian cadet who served as Hyuk's study partner. Her forearms gestured nervously as she spoke. Did humans really develop weapons that could destroy entire planets? Hyuk stopped walking and looked at her, with eyes that reflected too much knowledge. "They did not just develop them," he said quietly. "They built thousands of them. They pointed them at each other for decades, and they still maintain them today." Word of the revelations had reached the Academy's command structure within hours. Emergency meetings were called as senior officers tried to understand the implications of what their students had discovered. In his office overlooking the main Academy grounds, Admiral Korveth reviewed the human warfare data with growing alarm. The Draknari admiral had commanded fleets across 3 sectors and fought in dozens of conflicts. He considered himself an expert on military strategy and warfare doctrine. But the human data challenged every assumption he held about how civilized species approached conflict. "They maintain active nuclear arsenals?" he asked his aide, a competent Felinian officer named Taewan. "Not as historical artifacts, but as current military assets?" Taewan nodded grimly. According to the intelligence reports from their Sol system, humans currently possess approximately 13,000 nuclear warheads distributed across multiple nations, each one capable of destroying areas larger than our major cities. Admiral Corveth studied the tactical analysis on his display. The numbers made no strategic sense. No rational military force required that level of destructive capability for planetary defense. The only logical conclusion was that humans had built these arsenals for offensive purposes that extended beyond their own world. In the Academy's medical bay, Rena lay on a biobed while Etherian healers tried to stabilize her empathic overload. The gentle species' advanced emotional sensitivity made them excellent diplomats and counselors, but it also left them vulnerable to psychological trauma from violent imagery. The psychic residue from their warfare recordings is unlike anything we have encountered, reported Dr. Juno, the chief medical officer. The emotional patterns embedded in the data show levels of sustained aggression that exceed our measurement capabilities. Rena's consciousness drifted in and out of awareness as the healers worked to repair the damage caused by exposure to human psychological patterns. In her delirium, she relived fragments of the nuclear warfare footage, experiencing the terror and determination of humans facing the possibility of global extinction. "They choose it," she whispered through her medical sedation. "They choose to live with the fear. They make their children grow up knowing the world could end, and they call it strength." Throughout the academy, cadets gathered in small groups to discuss what they had learned. The human warfare revelation had created 3 distinct factions among the student body, each representing a different response to the shocking information. The largest group consisted of students who simply wanted nothing to do with humans. Led by cadets from peaceful species like the Etherians and scientific civilizations like the Karathi, they demanded that the Academy establish policies to avoid any interaction with human military personnel. "We came here to learn how to defend our homes," said Junsu, a Karathi engineering student whose people specialized in defensive technologies. "We did not sign up to learn how to become extinction-level threats to our own species." The discussion groups often became heated as students struggled to process what they had witnessed. Many found it difficult to believe that any rational species could develop such destructive capabilities and then choose to live with them permanently. The second faction, smaller but more vocal, consisted of students who were fascinated by human military doctrine despite their fear. These cadets, primarily from warrior cultures like the Dreknari and predatory species like the Felinians, recognized that human warfare techniques could revolutionize galactic military strategy. Fear aside, argued Dongyun, a Dreknari tactical student, their approach to deterrence has prevented major conflicts on their world for decades. No other species has achieved such comprehensive peace through military strength. This group faced ridicule and suspicion from their classmates. Other students questioned their mental stability and suggested they undergo psychological evaluation before being allowed to continue their military training. The third and smallest faction consisted of students who had remained in Commander Veltar's classroom after the mass resignations. These cadets, led by the few who had military experience from defensive conflicts, argued that understanding human warfare might be necessary for galactic security. "Ignorance will not make them go away," stated Minho, a seasoned Altarian officer, whose world had faced invasion attempts. "If humans are as dangerous as the footage suggests, we need to understand their capabilities and motivations." Commander Veltar himself had become the subject of intense scrutiny. Senior Academy officials questioned his decision to continue the lesson after students began showing signs of psychological distress. Some suggested he should have stopped the presentation when the first resignations occurred. The data was classified as routine historical analysis, Veltar explained to the review board. We had no indication that human warfare development would differ so dramatically from established patterns. Every other species follows predictable evolution from primitive conflict to peaceful coexistence. The review board studied the human warfare timeline with the same shock that had affected the cadets. Board members who had decades of military experience found themselves struggling to comprehend a species that had voluntarily chosen to live under the constant threat of extinction. They treat planetary destruction as a career specialty, observed Board Chair Admiral Seon, her voice reflecting disbelief. We have individual humans who could single-handedly destroy civilizations, and they consider this normal military training. Emergency protocols were activated throughout the academy as administrators tried to manage the crisis. Counseling services were overwhelmed with students seeking help to process what they had learned. Medical facilities treated dozens of cases of acute stress reactions and psychological trauma. The Academy's communication systems were flooded with messages from concerned families across the galaxy. Parents demanded to know why their children were being exposed to warfare data that caused mass resignations and medical emergencies. My daughter joined the Academy to become a defensive strategist, wrote one Etherian parent. She was not supposed to learn about species that weaponize extinction itself. How can she ever feel safe in the galaxy again? Similar messages poured in from dozens of worlds. The human warfare revelation was not just affecting the cadets who had witnessed it directly. The psychological impact was spreading throughout the galactic community as word of humanity's military capabilities reached civilian populations. In his quarters, Jimin sat alone, reading reports about his classmates' conditions and the Academy's crisis response. He felt a mixture of sadness and inevitability as he watched the galactic community struggle to understand his species. He had known this would happen eventually. Humans had always been different from other species in their approach to conflict and survival. The galaxy's peaceful civilizations were simply not prepared to encounter a species that had turned warfare into both an art form and a permanent lifestyle. The reports showed that over 60% of Veltar's class had officially resigned from the Academy. Medical facilities were treating students for conditions ranging from acute stress to complete psychological breakdown. The human warfare footage had accomplished something that no previous military crisis had achieved. It had broken the Academy's carefully trained officer candidates. Jimin knew that this was only the beginning. The footage they had seen covered only a fraction of human military development. Modern warfare capabilities, cyber operations, space-based weapons systems, and advanced special operations doctrine remained unviewed. If basic nuclear deterrence had caused this level of trauma, the complete picture of human military capabilities would likely trigger a galactic crisis. The Academy administrators were already discussing whether to classify all human warfare data at the highest security levels, available only to senior command personnel who had undergone extensive psychological preparation. The idea of routine military cooperation between humans and other species was beginning to seem impossible, as Jimin prepared for another day of isolation and suspicious glances from his few remaining classmates. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened on the neutral station of Harmony Prime, a massive structure that orbited between 3 star systems. Representatives from 47 civilizations gathered in the Great Chamber, their various forms and technologies creating a rainbow of alien diversity. But today, Their usual diplomatic calm was replaced by urgent whispers and fearful glances. Chancellor Mayong of the Etherian Collective called the session to order, her glowing form radiating the peace that her species was known for throughout the galaxy. But even her serene presence could not hide the tension that filled the chamber. "We have gathered to address what intelligence reports are calling the human question," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the universal translators. "Recent analysis of human warfare capabilities has raised concerns about their application for council membership." The great holographic display activated, showing the same footage that had broken the cadets at the Defense Academy. But this time, the audience consisted of the galaxy's most experienced leaders and military commanders. Surely they would be better prepared to handle what young cadets could not. They were wrong. Ambassador Jehoon of the Zenthari Collective was the first to react as the nuclear footage began. The telepathic species representative gripped his crystalline chair as psychic echoes from the recordings washed over his enhanced consciousness. "This is impossible," he whispered, his mental voice reaching every telepathic being in the chamber. "No rational species develops weapons capable of destroying their own world and then chooses to live with them. Fleet Admiral Yuna of the Draknari." Empire studied the tactical data with her species' legendary analytical precision. Her reptilian features remained calm, but her claws extended unconsciously as she processed the strategic implications of human nuclear doctrine. "According to these readings," she said slowly, "individual human nations possess enough destructive power to eliminate entire galactic sectors. This is not primitive warfare. This is extinction-level military capability wielded by pre-space flight. Civilizations!" The chamber erupted in concerned voices as representatives struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Species that had evolved beyond violence thousands of years ago found themselves confronting a civilization that had perfected violence beyond all reason. Minister Su-Young of the Karathi Science Directorate stood on her multiple legs, her insectoid features clicking in distress. "Our analysis indicates that humans have maintained active nuclear arsenals for nearly 8 decades. They have raised entire generations under the constant threat of planetary extinction and consider this normal." "Normal?" demanded Ambassador Heejin of the Felinian Trade Federation, her cat-like reflexes causing her to pace restlessly. "They live as prey to their own weapons. No predator species would voluntarily place itself in such danger." The debate quickly split along predictable lines as representatives formed into factions based on their species' evolutionary backgrounds and philosophical approaches to conflict. The quarantine faction emerged first, led by the peaceful Etherians and scientific Karathi. Chancellor Mayong spoke for this group, her glowing form dimming with distress as she addressed the assembly. "The evidence clearly shows that humans have not evolved beyond their violent nature," she stated. "They possess capabilities that threaten not just their own world, but potentially any world they encounter. Logic dictates that we maintain isolation protocols until they develop beyond their aggressive tendencies." Ambassador Tae-hyung of the Karathi Science Directorate supported this position with detailed analysis. "Conservative estimates suggest it may take 10,000 years for human psychology to evolve beyond its current violent patterns. During this period, contact with galactic civilization could be catastrophic for both sides." The scientific approach appealed to many representatives from peaceful species. They had successfully evolved beyond warfare through patience and gradual development. Surely humans could do the same, given enough time and isolation. But the integration faction, supported by pragmatic species and military-focused civilizations, saw the situation differently. Fleet Admiral Yuna spoke for this group, her tactical mind recognizing strategic realities that peaceful species preferred to ignore. Isolation is not a realistic option, she argued, her reptilian voice carrying the authority of centuries of military experience. Humans have already achieved limited spaceflight and show signs of rapid technological advancement. They will develop interstellar capabilities within decades, not millennia. Commander Veltar, attending as a military advisor, supported the Admiral's assessment. Our intelligence reports indicate that humans are actively developing faster-than-light communication and propulsion technologies. Isolation protocols will not prevent eventual contact. The integration advocates faced a difficult challenge. How could they argue for bringing a species into galactic civilization when that species had proven capable of extinction-level warfare against its own kind? Better to have them as allies than enemies, Admiral Yuna continued. Their military capabilities, while terrifying, could prove valuable for galactic defense against external threats. This argument sparked heated debate throughout the chamber. Many representatives found it difficult to imagine threats severe enough to justify allying with a species that treated planetary destruction as routine military planning. The smallest, but most vocal faction consisted of representatives who suggested that humanity posed too great a threat to galactic civilization to be allowed to develop further. General Minje of the Altarian Defense Force reluctantly voiced this position. If humans are willing to maintain extinction-level weapons against their own species, he said through his four-armed gesture system, what would they do to alien civilizations they perceive as threats? The logical conclusion is preemptive action, before they develop interstellar capabilities. This faction quickly lost support when intelligence analysts pointed out the practical difficulties of such an approach. Human nuclear capabilities meant that any attempt to eliminate them might result in their planet's destruction, potentially creating a radioactive hazard that could affect nearby systems. Attempting to remove humans by force could trigger the very weapons we fear, observed Dr. Yeji of the Etherian Peace Institute. Their doctrine of mutually assured destruction means they would likely respond to extinction threats by ensuring mutual extinction. As the debate continued, representatives requested more detailed analysis of human military capabilities. What they learned only increased their alarm. The nuclear weapons were just the beginning of human warfare development. Intelligence reports showed continued advancement in precision weapons, cyber warfare, and space-based military technologies. They have weaponized every domain of existence, reported Intelligence Chief Seonho of the Zenthari Collective. Land, sea, air, space, and even cyberspace have all been turned into battlefields by human military doctrine. The psychological profiles were equally disturbing. Unlike other species that fought for survival or resources, humans showed a willingness to fight and die for abstract concepts like freedom, democracy, and national honor. They treat warfare as a moral imperative, explained Dr. Che Young, the galaxy's leading expert on comparative psychology. Other species fight when necessary. Humans fight when they believe they are right, regardless of the practical consequences. This revelation sparked particular concern among the diplomatic community. How could you negotiate with a species that valued abstract principles more than survival itself? As the session extended into its second day, the Council found itself facing an unprecedented situation. Never before had they encountered a species that challenged their basic assumptions about how civilized beings should behave. Every previous contact has followed predictable patterns, Chancellor Myung observed during a recess. Species develop technology, achieve spaceflight, and eventually evolve beyond the need for warfare. Humans appear to have perfected warfare, while simultaneously developing space technology. The implications were staggering. If humans achieved interstellar travel while maintaining their current military mindset, they could potentially threaten every peaceful civilization in the galaxy. But isolation was becoming impossible as human technology advanced rapidly. "We need a third option," suggested Ambassador Hyun Woo of the Neutral Worlds Alliance. "Neither full integration nor complete isolation addresses the reality of human capabilities and development." As the Council struggled to find a solution, intelligence reports continued to arrive from the Sol system. Humans were not just maintaining their military capabilities, they were actively expanding them. Space-based weapons platforms, automated defense systems, and military artificial intelligence programs all showed rapid advancement. The galaxy was running out of time to decide how to handle humanity before humanity decided how to handle the galaxy. After 3 days of heated debate, the Galactic Council reached a decision that would reshape interstellar politics forever. Chancellor Mayong stood before the Assembly, her Etherean features glowing with the weight of historic responsibility. "The Council has voted," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the Great Chamber. "Humanity will be granted conditional membership in galactic civilization, subject to unprecedented restrictions and monitoring protocols." The decision satisfied no one completely, but it represented the only compromise that all factions could accept. The quarantine advocates had wanted complete isolation. The integration supporters had pushed for full membership. The elimination faction had demanded immediate action. Instead, they had chosen a middle path that acknowledged both the danger and the inevitability of human contact. Fleet Admiral Yuna outlined the new protocols that would govern human integration. Human military personnel will serve in separate units to prevent what our psychologists term contamination effects on alien forces. Joint operations will be limited to emergency situations and conducted under strict supervision. The restrictions were extensive and detailed. Human warfare doctrine would be classified at the highest security levels, available only to senior military commanders who had undergone months of psychological preparation. Any non-human personnel assigned to work with human forces would require mandatory mental health evaluations before, during, and after their service. "We are essentially creating a quarantine within integration," observed Ambassador Ji-hoon of the Zenthari Collective. "Humans will be part of galactic civilization, but isolated from direct contact with species that cannot psychologically handle their military nature." The Council also authorized the establishment of specialized human integration academies on remote stations, designed specifically for species that could potentially work alongside human forces. These facilities would be staffed by volunteers who had demonstrated unusual psychological resilience and military experience. Commander Veltar found himself appointed as the first director of such an academy. His experience with the devastating classroom lesson had made him one of the galaxy's few experts on human warfare psychology and its effects on alien minds. "We will need to completely redesign military education for human cooperation," he explained to the Council. "Standard training assumes that all species follow rational warfare patterns. Humans require specialized preparation that most beings are simply not capable of completing." The vote had been close. 24 civilizations in favor, 20 in opposition, with 3 abstentions. The margin reflected the galaxy's deep uncertainty about how to handle a species that challenged every assumption about civilized behavior. Back at the original Defense Academy, Jimin received notification of the Council's decision through official channels. He read the new protocols with mixed emotions. Humanity had achieved membership, but at the cost of being treated as a permanent threat that required constant management. The restrictions meant that human officers would serve in isolation from other species. Joint training exercises would be limited and heavily supervised. Most aliens would never directly interact with human military personnel unless they volunteered for specialized programs and passed extensive psychological screening. "We are being accepted as dangerous allies," Jimin wrote in his personal log. "The galaxy recognizes our value but fears our nature. Perhaps this is the best outcome we could have hoped for." The few alien cadets who had remained in Veltar's class after the mass resignations became the first students in the experimental human integration program. They underwent months of counseling and gradual exposure to human military doctrine, learning to understand and work with humanity's approach to warfare. Nari was among those who eventually returned to the program. Her felinian predatory instincts, once she understood them properly, allowed her to comprehend human aggression in ways that peaceful species could not. "Humans are apex predators who hunt concepts instead of prey," she explained to her counselors. "They stalk abstract ideas like freedom and justice with the same intensity my people reserve for survival itself. Once I understood this, their behavior became comprehensible." Quan also returned, his analytical Draknari mind fascinated by the strategic implications of human warfare doctrine despite his initial horror. "They have solved military problems that we did not even know existed," he said. "Their approach to deterrence, while terrifying, has achieved something no other species has managed: perfect peace through perfect threat." Hyok never returned to the academy. The telepathic student's mental contact with human warfare psychology had left him permanently changed. He spent months in Etherian healing centers, trying to purge the residual psychic echoes of nuclear warfare from his consciousness. "I touched minds that considered extinction an acceptable outcome," he told his healers. "That knowledge cannot be unlearned. I will never feel safe in the galaxy again, knowing that such beings exist." His reaction became typical of telepathic species throughout the galaxy. The ability to sense thoughts and emotions made them particularly vulnerable to human military psychology. Special isolation protocols were established to protect telepathic beings from accidental contact with human warfare doctrine. The first Human Integration Academy opened 6 months after the council vote, staffed by carefully selected volunteers from species with high psychological resilience ratings. The facility was located on a remote station far from populated systems, designed to contain any potential incidents during the experimental program. Commander Veltar stood in the Academy's main briefing room, addressing the first class of volunteers. These aliens had undergone extensive screening and preparation, but he knew that many would still struggle with what they were about to learn. "You are here to learn how to work with humanity's military forces," he announced. "This will require you to understand concepts that most civilized beings find incomprehensible. Some of you will not complete the program. There is no shame in recognizing your limitations." The program's curriculum was carefully designed to gradually expose students to human warfare concepts. They began with historical analysis, then moved to tactical doctrine, and finally to the psychological principles that drove human military thinking. Many students dropped out during the early phases, unable to psychologically handle even basic human military concepts. Those who remained developed into a unique specialty within galactic civilization. officers capable of understanding and coordinating with humanity's forces while maintaining their own species' values and perspectives. On Earth, human governments remained largely unaware of the galaxy-wide crisis their military history had triggered. They continued preparing their application for council membership, including comprehensive cultural and historical documentation that would likely cause further diplomatic incidents. The council established strict protocols for managing future human cultural exchanges. Any material related to human warfare, conflict resolution, or historical military development would be classified and reviewed by specialized teams before being released to the general galactic population. "We cannot prevent humans from being themselves," Chancellor Mayong explained to the Implementation Committee. "But we can control how much of their nature we expose to species that cannot psychologically handle it." The compromise solution created a new category in galactic law: conditionally civilized species. Humans became the first and only civilization granted this status, acknowledging their advanced technology and social development while recognizing their fundamental difference from other sapient beings. Years later, as the first human-alien joint, military operations began under the new protocols. The galaxy learned to work with humanity's unique capabilities. Human forces proved invaluable in defending against external threats that peaceful civilizations could not comprehend or counter. But the psychological cost remained. Every alien who worked with human forces required ongoing mental health support. Every joint operation included counselors and support staff to help non-human personnel cope with exposure to humanity's approach to warfare. The galaxy had gained powerful allies, but at the price of innocence. The discovery of humanity had forced every peaceful civilization to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of conflict and survival in a universe that was not always peaceful. Jimin, now serving as a liaison officer in the integration program, often reflected on the path that had brought humanity into galactic civilization. They had been accepted, but as dangerous necessities rather than welcomed equals. "Perhaps," he wrote in his final Academy report, "this is what it means to be human in a galaxy that chose peace. We are the guardians that others cannot be, carrying burdens that others cannot bear, ensuring survival in ways that others cannot understand." The galaxy had learned that humans did not just wage war. They had transformed warfare itself into an art form that spanned from individual heroism to species-ending strategy. The question was no longer whether humanity belonged in galactic civilization, but whether galactic civilization could survive the knowledge of what humanity was truly capable of achieving. In the end, they had no choice but to try.